An NFL football player's commencement speech goes viral. AI continues its inevitable global takeover, and perhaps movies just have way too much talking in them. We talk about all that and more on this episode of Faith and Pop Culture. Hey, well, what's up, everyone? Welcome to episode number 11 of the Faith and Pop Culture Podcast. It is me, your host, Daniel, and I am joined, as I always am, by the satisfying scratch to my mosquito bite, Mr. Samuel David Camp. What is up?
Well, what I always tell my daughters is don't scratch. We rub mosquito bites.
Oh, but that's not as satisfying.
I know. Well, they don't think so either because their bodies are just covered in scratched mosquito bites.
I mean, I don't know what it is about, like, if it's my blood type or something, but mosquitoes hate me. Like, I was playing...
or do they love you, Daniel?
Yeah, maybe they love me too much. I was playing baseball with my kids outside the other day, and like my legs were so covered that, like, even though it's like Georgia summer here, like I had to wear jeans, pants out, because it looked like I was diseased. Like my legs were so covered with scratches. But hey, the joys of summer that no one
asked for,
asked for. But other unexpected surprises that kind of came our way this week was I was just on my social media and getting confronted by ads, as tends to happen, and came across an advertisement for the new Angel Studios movie, Sight, which is hitting theaters this week. And as I'm watching through that, lo and behold, I see myself, or at least my writing, a quote from myself. So we were featured, The Collision out in the wild.
That was pretty cool.
This is the first time we've been, some of our stuff have been in other advertising, like mailing lists and stuff, it shows up now and then. But this is the first time to like see ourselves like a pull quote in a
and like a video ad for an upcoming movie. I don't know. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so I don't know what that means, only that it is cool. So it's kind of the next thing to check on the bingo thing is now we just need to get on like the front of like a movie box. Like, you know, they always have like the one quote. Yeah. So we're slowly checking off things.
Surrounded by those like olive leaves, you know, as featured in.
So step by step. But one important step that many of us take in our life is graduation. Those are always important days. I spent way too much of my life in school, so I've had...
You've had quite a few graduations.
I've had several of those, and one of the things that we have at graduations is commencement speakers.
Unfortunately.
That kind of tell us, this is, you're entering the world, no matter how old you are, that things are going to get rough, and, but you can persevere and all that stuff that...
and your whole life has been in preparation for this moment.
But sometimes you get other stuff. And kind of the first story that I thought we could dive into on this episode is one that's been kind of a cultural conversation, people debating, even arguing about this. Either way,
difference of
opinion, believe it or not. And that is kind of the quickly viral commencement speak by the Kansas City Chiefs kicker Harrison Butker, who just delivered a speech at a Catholic college, and it sparked conversations because he gets into several things. It's about being Catholic and but also like politics and cultural stuff and just a bunch of hot button things. He was waiting. He was wading through it.
Yeah, he brought his muck boots to that speech.
And like I said, it spawned different responses. Some people very much praising it for kind of endorsing, validating just like traditional Catholic theology and viewpoints. Other people were not as impressed and accused it of being very like misogynistic or overly political or whatnot. We both watched through this speech. What were your sort of thoughts? Is the controversy valid? Is it nothing? Is it something in the middle?
Yeah, surprise, surprise. It's something in the middle, I think. I think a lot of the maybe principles that he put forward. Some of the theology I would agree with. I think the issue really comes in the way that he sort of couches this whole speech. Like, I think he could have given this entire speech in a way that was not couched in sort of culture war talk and not as political. Like, I think he could have spoken to these graduates and sort of by default the world, since this was kind of going all over the place, in a way that could be very affirming and validating and encouraging and challenging to the graduates, but that didn't have to have a lot of the just framing of it in sort of this us versus them culture war-y kind of jargon.
Yeah, because I think that's what sort of has got missed. Because in some ways, this kind of viral speech it reflects a lot of just where we are today as culture.
Yeah.
Like, both the speech itself and also I think like the response to it, because the response is very much just sort of like, okay, it's new battlefield to, warfare going on. Go stand in your line, go back to your team. And it's very like, we hate this or we love this, kind of depending on what side you are on, kind of us versus them. And kind of, I think as a result, there just hasn't been, I think, a lot of just discussion in that like squishy middle of like, hey, we're pro what he's saying, but some of the stuff he said, like maybe how he said, like, there's conversations to be had, like we support, his, kind of Christian values and, the freedom he has to say them. But the way he said some of it, I think maybe isn't.
I mean, you really get the sense that like maybe this should not have been recorded and publicized. Like I think it was probably a perfectly fine commencement speech to those students, and like in that bubble would be my guess, and it would have been nothing to it was like, hey, that was great, move on with your life. But I think because you're submitting this to the World Wide Web and the opinions that are found therein, it's not something that I don't think was well received or spoken in a way with like, or maybe he did have sort of a broader audience in mind when he did speak, who knows. But it's like I think he could have done a lot better job in crafting a speech that could say all the things that he wanted to say, but in a way that wasn't quite so divisive.
Yeah, because I do think the context is important. Like, obviously, when you do a speech and you're a celebrity and it's recorded and put on the internet, like, there's going to be some public dimension to it. But like, the direct audience is a specific group of graduates, and I think I don't think it was necessarily intended for like other people to nitpick and like. Yeah. But as far as speaking of just other people nitpicking,
but why not nitpick?
Like you said, I do think there is, like, again, I think overall it's sort of like it's a silly controversy. It's going to blow over. No one's going to remember it. And I agree with a lot of what like the foundational truths that he is getting at. But like you said, I think I did have kind of an issue with just the way that I feel like it reflects some like mindsets that I find harmful in our culture of like, you have like the Christian mission and being a Christian, then you have like the more political culture warfare and just like how intertwined those have become to where it's like he's kind of speaking to these these Catholic graduates and about the calling as a Christian and like as a Catholic and sort of what that means and like and just sort of the next step though is like, and it's to go fight against the Democrats, basically. It's very political and it's very we need you not because of just the gospel or the love of Jesus, but it's because the other side of the political spectrum has messed everything up in this country and it's a crazy world. And this guy he goes through all the hot button issues and like it's very much just sort of like to be kind of sent on mission now is to like go fight the culture war, which I just don't think is as inspiring or like as needed of a call to action as I think we tend to like. It tends to be the case with things.
I think people who give that call to action overestimate the need to have that call to action. And I'm reminded of something that your cousin Rob said when he was on. We did an interview with him maybe a year ago or so, but he was saying never start with the issues. Sort of when you come up with these. Whatever the problem, social issue of the day is, never start with the issue, but go back to Scripture and seek your foundation first. And I think way too many people, and especially I'll just say Christians, begin with the issue, and I think this speech is very much in line with that. Of, hey, here are the issues that are out there, and this is why we need to go out and fight them. Rather than taking a step back and looking at the fundamentals of what does it mean to be a Christian, like, cementing your calling as a believer, as a follower of Jesus. It's so wrapped up in the politics of today, the issues of today, and really, it's kind of in some ways foundationless when not to like his principles. Some of the principles he mentioned are sound, but
because that is the interesting thing with the speech too. Again, like we're pro him. We don't want to just like nitpick. And he says too, he's not like a professional speaker. He's a football player. But because his speech sort of does both. Like in the one hand, like, a lot of what he's saying is very much like he uses the terms like stay in your lane, and it's very much like focus on your vocation and like just your sort of your calling. It's just that you can't go too far down that road without like pulling in some like hot button political kind of controversy, like discussion or to sort of make it political. There's just sort of this like inconsistency with that, which I feel like is so reflective of.
I think it is sort of his speech, and the reaction to it is very much, I think, a snapshot of the culture that we're all unfortunately living in right now. And I do think there is some irony, because many times he mentioned staying in your lane and seemed to be calling out other people if not staying in their lane. And it's just, he's an NFL player, giving a commencement speech on like politics and religion. And it's like, okay, there's some irony there in staying in one's lane. And I don't even like that term, because I think it's kind of it's
reductionist to like that we are, he is a football player. And like that's all he is.
The sum total of who he is.
That he's like a human who plays football, and he also, votes in the election, and he does other things, and he can speak. But so again, it's not just like pile on him. I think whatever, the speech is fine. I just think it's interesting because it reflects a lot of things in our culture. But hey, the culture that he's speaking about may not even be around all that long if
it's true.
If AI has its way and quickly takes over the world. So kind of another story that I don't want us to get too deep into, but I thought I would mention is involving AI and Miss Scarlett Johansson. So again, if you haven't followed any of the conversation for this, like the kind of the chat GPT, the kind of AI kind of tool was like introducing like new voices, essentially like a Siri or Alexa, like,
right.
sort of to be like the voice of this. And they wanted to get Johansson to like be the voice because she has a good voice, but also because she like played a movie called Her, where she was essentially that, like she was the voice of.
She was the AI voice of this device that Joaquin Phoenix falls in love with.
Yeah, so like they wanted to kind of get her voice,
And apparently Sam Altman, one of the founders the founder of OpenAI, which owns ChatGPT, apparently likes her voice.
Yeah, apparently a lot. So they tried to recruit her to like record the voice and use it, and the AI is a very hot button thing for like in Hollywood and actresses and actors and all that kind of creatives these days. So like she declined, and then like they released the voices, and whoa, one of them sounds an awful lot like Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah.
So they kind of went ahead and just sort of used her voice anyways. At least that's what it seems. And the whole thing is sort of starting to blow up into where she's gonna, I'm sure, file a lawsuit, and she's speaking out about it. And like a lot of it is like we don't want to get into like the nitty gritty of like the conversation.
Yeah.
But I do think it is just sort of another example of just like sort of the whole AI thing. Like it's the whole kind of this tech stuff. Like it's not always just sort of squeaky clean. It's all your friend.
No, and in fact, I don't know that it's ever always been that way. It's at a scale and a level now that I don't even think we can even like comprehend. Like I think it's so much bigger, I think, than we can even get our minds around, that it's just difficult to even have, I think, conversations about it, because it's like on every level there's some usage of AI. And I also just think like the understanding of what AI is also kind of just confusing and murky. And I think we use it oftentimes to refer to like just general intelligence or like smart computers or whatever, but it's not necessarily there yet. And I don't know. So I think it can be a real kind of muddy conversation.
There's so much to the whole discussion. Like it's still so new. For me, at least, this sort of story, whatever you want to call it, is just sort of like a reminder of the human element. Like I feel like we think of AI almost as like replacing humans, or that it's almost like it's all self-run, like some sci-fi movie. And where this is a reminder that like if you go back far enough, like it's still at the end of the day, at least now, until it becomes sentient and self governing, like it's still like humans are creating the algorithms. Humans are behind setting things up. Like there is, because like people often talk about it as like it's just a tool, as though like it's like a hammer. Like you just it's something, you can use it for good, you can use it for bad. Like it's sort of this neutral thing, which I just don't think is like a good comparison, because it's not just like a tool. Like you can use it, it can be a valuable thing. You can use it for good, but like there is sort of humans that are kind of fallen, sinful humans at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And like this reminds us that like some of those people aren't necessarily just like benevolent. Like there's some shady stuff, and there's other agendas and motivations and stuff. And like,
well, it kind of makes me think, saying it's not like a neutral tool. It makes me think of like if you had like a video camera and you were wanting to film some stuff, but the camera just had very strong preferences, like, it didn't like certain colors, or like it only exposed at like a certain level, and it's like, well, it has like these built-in preferences that you have to like constantly override, and so it's like it's not just a tool, it's like you have to almost work against it to like make it it's so much more than, it's like an obstinate tool in some ways, like it can be anyways in certain situations, but
because it's more in line with like something like TikTok, that whole discussion, or even like Google, of like, is it just sort of this neutral platform, and you can make videos about this, you can make counter videos and all that. It's like at one level that's true.
Yeah.
But like what the the algorithm is set up to show you and filter and not show you, like, is can drastically change and weight sort of the messaging and stuff.
Right.
And that comes from people. Like people design some of that algorithm, and like, which is why the whole TikTok and trying to ban TikTok and that whole discussion, like, and we're just sort of seeing like AI will never really be truly neutral.
Yeah.
Because it's, at some point you trace it back to humans that have their own biases and
agendas and whatever
agendas
else.
And stuff.
Well, and I think the TikTok thing is good too, because like that kind of gets lumped into AI, where it's like, well, those are algorithms. And so I think even that can be kind of start to get muddy, because it's like using TikTok isn't using necessarily AI. It's just using, like, you're using a service that has a biased algorithm in some way. Like it's just biased, whether that's biased for the things that you like, the things that you prefer. So it'll have like a weighted bias as you prefer things. It's going to like say, okay, he wants more of, dancing cats or whatever. Like
Don't we all?
it's going to just kind of go that direction. And so I think it is just sort of like the water we're swimming in now, but like AI versus like just algorithms, I think are also like two separate things.
Yeah, there's
well.
not like it's like, yeah, TikTok's probably more similar to like Google or something with search results, or like, as opposed to, but it is funny because even like, there's been other like AI attempts and stuff, and inevitably, at least at this point, like they always just sort of reflect like the very strong extreme biases of like whoever the people making them happen to be. Like,
well, and like we saw that with Gemini released from Google like not too long ago. Like it wouldn't make a Caucasian George Washington. I don't know if you saw this. So like it was a whole thing, because it's like at the end of the day, you've got people building these systems, and what they build into these systems are what comes out the other end. And so, like you said, it's like, yes, there's AI, but it's like you can trace it back to people with ideas, with preferences, with agendas that are like training this. And then also, where do they get the data they're training on is a big part of it as well. And so I think it's just, it'll be an interesting few years. And I think this is all also coming a lot faster than I think we even realize. Because I think just, a few, like maybe a year ago, it was like there was a crazy like Will Smith eating spaghetti video, and it was just this mad sort of like jumble of things where you'd ask the AI to make a video of Will Smith eating spaghetti, and it just couldn't do it. But now it's like you can't tell the difference between like an AI generated video and like an actual
except
video.
for the hands.
except for the hands,
know why
which have gotten better. Which that was the whole thing with the Will Smith video. It was like it just hands everywhere and like spaghetti, and it's just, I mean, it's really funny if you go back and watch those. But
it is like, as Christians.
But that was a year ago, and it's like, and here we are, like the text to video functionality of some of this stuff is just kind of off the charts at this point, and like that's only been a year.
Because even like my wife's a high school teacher, and like students use AI to try and write their papers, and it's like you can tell,
of course they do.
but it's hard to prove because
Yeah.
it's becoming, and like you can even put like, write me a paper in the tone of a 16-year-old high school student, and then it will use that kind of language, or like it's, so yeah, it's going a lot faster. But I do think as Christians, like I don't think there's no answers yet to a lot of the stuff, but it is one of those things that like if we're called to like preserve truth and like protect truth and preach truth, like that is significantly influenced by these sort of discussions, and like how truth is presented and how people are coming, processing truth or getting their truth. So it is a conversation that Christians should be involved in, even if, like everyone else, there's no real answers. Kind of the last thing that I thought we could just talk a bit about today was just, I kind of came across an interesting, I guess, article, fact thing, because there's a new movie that is releasing this week, Mad Max movie, Furiosa. Looks like a nice spectacle action movie.
Things blow up.
Cars drive fast. Hey, I'm actually looking forward to it. I think it will be interesting. But these movies, like these, at least the last, like Fury Road, which I think came out in like 2015, very similar movie. This is like the prequel to that. Was like notorious, or like not notorious, like famous for like very little dialogue, very just like practical effects and crazy things. Like it's just this
heavy on the action.
Yeah, heavy action. Like not a whole lot of like long conversations and stuff, and like just sort of thrilling you. And this Furiosa seems like it is going to definitely honor that legacy, because there was a in one of the interviews leading up to this, it came out that the lead character, who is played by Anya Taylor-Joy, is that her?
Yeah, I think so.
Is that she has in the entire movie only 30 lines of dialogue, which is not a whole lot for typically. And I thought that just stood out to me too, because like, a lot of the conversation that becomes such like what like a movie without tons of dialogue. And hey, as an introvert, I'm all for people speaking less. So I'm supporting this. But I think it's interesting because I think it reflects in some ways like how we think of movies and like cinema and entertainment, and like sort of like the role of like, what's the role of like the visuals and like all these other like the music aesthetic components, as opposed to like the dialogue and the more like explicitly like narrative kind of elements. And I feel like, and I think all people, but I think Christians can be even the worst at this, is like we very heavily weigh the dialogue part and the way we think about films and the way we make films and the way we talk about the messages of films. Like we almost like kind of downplay in like a like a unfavorable way like the visuals, or like this we just sort of dismiss it as this is sort of a bunch of spectacle. Like we need story, we need things, and I don't know, like is that
if you don't believe that, like if you think Christians do value like the visuals, then just go back and watch any faith-based film of the last like 20 years, and it is heavy on the dialogue and very light on the visuals, because it's like mostly bad visuals with like a Sunday school story sandwiched in between. And it's like, because I can remember even certain like faith-based films that were just bad, like just like it wasn't, the scenes weren't even lit well, and it's like, so yeah, I think we do have that tendency to,
and I
like,
do think there's two ways it can be bad. I think we're guilty of both.
Yeah.
Like there's the way that you mentioned of like it just like it looks bad. Like it's a bad,
like it's technically bad.
Yeah, I guess technically
I guess
it just doesn't look it doesn't look cinematic. It just looks like Jimmy brought his camera out for Christmas to make a home video, like which we've come a long way from that. But I think the other way too is just that it's not effectively used. Like it's, even if it looked good technically, like there was I think there still is like a hesitancy to like communicate story visually, like to kind of communicate like the tensions within the characters, or establish the sort of what their struggles or their personalities are in like nonverbal ways,
Yeah.
as opposed to just like having these very like clearly contrived dialogues where they just sort of tell someone else what they're, I'm just really struggling with, and they go through all the, all the plot points you need. Like, and again, I don't think it's just Christians, but I do think that we overlook just like how important, like, and how like foundational the other aspects of, which, like, if you go back to like the beginning of cinema, like dialogue came by necessity, but like
after,
later, like, like the original movies, like they might have had like the title cards, like, like the little ding, ding, the little piano, and they'd put up,
Jimmy, go to the bar.
The stuff, but like, they're like silent movies, and like they'd have like the orchestra, like, there'd be music, and but like they had to communicate way more.
It was an overemphasis on the nonverbal communication, and I think like movies are primarily a nonverbal communicative medium, and as far as like the arts go, and so I think it's nonverbal communication should be first, and then as necessary, dialogue can be like, if you're making a movie, I would think, at least in my mind, focus on the nonverbals first, like what are the setting or the placement of the camera, all the different ways that you can nonverbally communicate through cinema, which I think is like, that's kind of what it's good at, is nonverbal communication, and then fill in the gaps with the dialogue if you're going to go that route. But
because it's funny, because like story is important, like story and like narrative, but it's always just been weird to me that we dismiss, like, something like Avatar or like the Rings of Power, some of these things, like, it's like, well, it looks nice, but like, almost like, it's like, well, like that's part of, like, that's an equal, like that's a very important part of, like looking nice, communicating things, visual, like the spectacle of it, like, obviously it can be empty without sort of anything else going on to it, but like, just because there's like, its strength is its visuals, doesn't necessarily mean that it's like, is it even a real film, because it doesn't have like, whatever else. And even I was trying to think of, like, obviously we don't have silent movies anymore. Although I'm surprised that someone hasn't tried to. Maybe they have. Like,
I'm sure somebody has.
Kind of try that again, but
there are lots of movies that are very, very light on the dialogue, and most of them were made a long time ago. I mean, they weren't silent films, but like a lot of like Andrei Tarkovsky's stuff, it's all like long shots and very, very slow. And so I think people just don't have the attention
even like
span.
the original A Quiet Place, the like horror movie.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
The premise of it, like there is dialogue, but like the whole premise is they can't talk or the aliens find you and kill you. So like they can't have a lot of dialogue. So it's mostly, and even like I think like Pixar, some of like the best like emotional storytelling that we have, like some of their best stuff is their silent stuff. Like the intro, like the first, like however long that is, like 10 minutes of Up, where it's just like their love story kind of growing up, and like, they communicate all the backstory and stuff. Like with
Boy,
just music,
just rips
like,
your heart out too.
Just all these grown men,
Everyone's
and sobbing, and then like WALL-E is the other one too, where like until they get to the spaceship and there's like humans, it's just sort of these two robots that like beep beep, they kind of beep at each other, and like, but you're able to communicate.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the beauty of cinema, is that it's such a wonderful nonverbal communication device, if you will. Like, it's just that's what I think sets it apart from a lot of other forms of art, is like you can say so much with so few words.
Yeah, and I think too, like, sort of is it, on the one hand, like, this matters because I feel like we should learn to appreciate and like approach art in a thoughtful way and like understand how it works. But like, I feel like it's also important as Christians, just to understand that like the way, particularly movies, I think all art, but like, is working on us, like, because we see it so much, like we weigh the the dialogue and the words and stuff, and like the intellectual, the worldview that's explicitly, this character said this saying, and that seems like it's anti-Christian, like the way we engage with it. I feel like we can be blind to the ways that like, I think the more impactful way that films are actually communicating stuff, like, not that they're always like separate, like you only have visual, or you have, like, a lot of times those are like together. There's an interesting book that I read. It's not an easy read, but I'll put it in the show notes. Moving Viewers, American Film and the Spectator's Experience, and it's like a more philosophical book, but like, essentially the whole point is that like the way that sort of cinema impacts us is at a more like emotional heart level,
Yeah.
not a head level. Like he has a couple of great quotes in there just about like, the strength of like the intellectual message. Essentially he says like is only as powerful as like the aesthetic like vehicle that communicates it. Like, you can, which is why I think a lot of faith-based early films weren't impactful, because they had a good message, but like they didn't have that undergirding of like the emotional, the rich, the visuals, the music to make that kind of get saturated. Like, but because I think like when you, even like when you discuss it as Christians, like a movie after you watch, like it's very much like, what do you think of that? Like, what do I think of this thing that was said, and how does that relate to the Bible? But like much, less often do we think, like, what was I feeling? Like, what did this movie make me feel? Like, what did I feel about this visual or this thing, which maybe is like harder to like articulate, but in some ways is like goes deeper than just sort of these like abstract messages.
Yeah, and again, I think that's the power of film is it can really affect you on a deep level, even beyond what you're able to articulate or to like think about it. And so I think that's why it's important to have those conversations about movies and not just say, well, what did you like and dislike, or what was the message of this film, which I think is often the fallback for a lot of people. But, how did it make you feel? I think is a great question to ask yourself. And
it's harder to guard against. Like like I very rarely get overly, worked up about a movie that's like explicitly just saying things that aren't Christian. Like that's easy to be like, okay, he said this. Like I'm sure the filmmakers thought that. I don't agree with that. You can sort of have that conversation at more of like an abstract level. It's harder to like not feel something. Like if a movie just, the way it presents maybe like a Christian pastor or character, and it's sort of this like icky thing, or there's something about it that like you attach this very like, disturbing, like unsettling emotion to, like that's harder to sort of unroot, like when it sinks in, because it's not like you can't counter argue. I mean, you can, I guess, examples or things, but I think that's why I guess as Christians, like film is a very multi-aesthetic medium, not just so like as we make films, but also just as we like engage with films, we need to be just aware of like the way that it's working on us, and sort of at a more like deeper emotional level. But one of the things that I know works on me at a very, very deep emotional level is what you are about to share in the next segment of this podcast. We have things we like that you should like too.
Well, buckle up, Daniel, because I'm bringing the heat this week, and that is one of my favorite things to talk about, and that's Lego. It also hits on a very deep emotional level, but more specifically, Lego movies. I was reminded this week of how great some of those are, because I think there's an upcoming Star Wars Lego movie, and I saw the trailer. I forget the name of it now, but I saw the trailer for it. And it had something to do with like some timelines get crossed, and there ends up being a Darth Jar Jar, which I just think is just so funny. But we've talked on here before about sort of like, deconstructing heroes and different things like that. But I think a way that is done really, really well is with like the Lego movies, and they're so much fun. And like the Batman, the Lego Batman, some of the Lego Star Wars stuff is just great at having fun with sort of cultural icons, and I don't know, they're just really great films. So go out and watch one of the Lego movies if you have Disney Plus. I think they're all on there. So well, I think they're just I don't know.
Because I think you're right. Like they like poke fun in like hilarious ways at all these like properties, but like you never feel like they're like making fun of or like belittling. Like it's not like deconstructing in the way of like, this is dumb and you're dumb for thinking it's not dumb. Like it's very like, like Star Wars. Like Star Wars is like at its core like a super goofy thing. Yeah. Like I love Star Wars, like, but like there's so much sort of goofy silliness to it. Like and like those like Lego stuff, like poke fun at those while also like celebrating the thing.
It's in such a good humored way, I think. And I don't know, I was reminded of that. I think I saw have you seen the preview for this Lego Star Wars?
I don't know if I saw it was announced.
Yeah. I don't know. It just made me think like, oh yeah, like Lego movies, like they've got some really good stuff in them.
Which,
And so,
speaking of Lego, I don't know if you saw, they just announced, Lego did, that they are releasing a new Lord of the Rings, like Sauron's Tower
ooh.
Lego set. Like it's over $400.
Well, if you start saving now, Daniel, I bet you can get it for Christmas.
I'm hoping someone,
Hopefully Santa,
maybe even someone here,
your lips to Santa's ears.
But yeah, Lego knows that it Lego's for kids and adults. Adults are the ones with the money that will pay $500 for a Sauron Tower. So hey,
why wouldn't you?
We all need a little bit of that in our life, and hopefully you guys have enjoyed having a little bit of this podcast in your life. 11 episodes. We're kind of working towards the next 10.
But before we do, we'll go to our next segment of the show, which is out now and coming soon.
So I was just so excited to get to what you like.
And you were enthralled by my description of Legos and the movies they
make. I knew
make.
nothing coming out in Hollywood could satisfy me as much as hearing from you. But there is actually a lot coming out this week. Something that is out is If. I know that was a movie that I was excited to. Well, I don't know if I was excited to see it, but imagination, sentimental, kids growing up, like all that stuff is just in my sappy heart.
It hits in all the right places.
And I actually like this movie. I know there's a lot of critiques of it that are very valid, and it is sort of a weird movie that it's like sort of like, who is this for? And there's some language that I was not happy with, but I do think overall it had like a very sweet spirit to it. So I liked it maybe more than a lot of people did. Garfield, did you grow up with Garfield?
I did. I remember Garfield. I for whatever reason was never a fan. So
see, I was. I don't know that me. Sort of my spirit.
We're different people, you and I, Daniel.
Cat that just doesn't want to leave the house and watch this.
I don't know that I ever. I don't know. I remember it being around, and so I'm familiar with it, but I don't think I ever got into it for whatever reason. Like I think I was probably just indifferent to it.
Well, this movie won't necessarily get you into it, because I was okay. It's fine. My kids thought it was fine, and that's probably what matters more than the cynical adult. But it just was a very generic. This is a new animated movie for kids.
Yeah, but we've got you've got your review up for that.
Yeah, so the review's up. So check out my full thoughts. And like I said, Cite. If you're enticed by us, the quote featured in some of the advertisements, and want to see my full thoughts, again, Cite comes out this week, so check out my review. I actually enjoyed this movie quite a bit. And then Furiosa, the last one, I'm seeing that this weekend, so I encourage you guys, if you check in. I don't know if I'll like it, if I won't like it. I'm hoping I do.
I'll hold my breath until I know.
Until you can find my full thoughts. But thanks once again for joining us for this episode. Hope you'll join us next week, every Thursday, for just diving into all the craziness, all the fun stuff, all the controversies in pop culture. So we will see you then for more conversations on faith and pop culture.